Good evening, Lake Orion. Welcome to History Now here on ONTV. I am your host, Anthony Taormina. Today I'm going to do a book review. Yes, a book review called Stones and Water by Donna Napoli. The book review that I'm focusing on it does focus on World War II, but it also focuses on it's a historical fiction. It's the intent of the book was to focus on little known boys, the Axis powers, that would mean Germany, Italy, Hungary, Romania, Bulgaria. They viewed as invention, or basically as inferior. They basically focused mostly on, what's significant about this is they focused on the German allies, Italy, Hungary, Romania, Bulgaria. Because if you look at it, what was their true roles in the war? You look at, we often talk about, okay, what was Hitler's, or what was Mussolini's role? We often talk about the men, but we don't really talk about the boys. We don't talk about what the Italian boy was going through, or what the Hungarian boy was going through, or the Romanian boy, or the Bulgarian boy. Often or not, we focus on the men, and throughout the war, that seemed to be so. This book intends to focus on what the Italian boy was going through, or what the Hungarian boy, Romanian boy. In this case, it focuses on Italy. Donna Napoli, she's often a fiction writer. A lot of her works mostly focus on fiction writing. In this case, Stones and Water is a historical fiction book. And she did extensive research on the subject in Italy and in Switzerland. She focused mostly on wanting to pay attention towards particularly Italian boys. She has Italian heritage. She has family back in Italy. And also, this book means a lot to me in particular because I have Sicilian roots in me. I have Sicilian, you know how in Italy you view yourself, if you're from Venice, you tend to view yourself as Venetian. If you're from Rome, you tend to view yourself as Roman. Not always do you regard yourself as the nationalist Italian. But in this case, this is important because this book tends to focus on what Italians were going through, especially Italian boys going through during World War II, and also, as a whole, the Italian army as a whole as well, and the Italian people as a whole. I make mention in prior of my conversations that Italy was never truly committed to the war. Benito Mussolini, however, was. Benito Mussolini forced the Italian people to fight in a war that they didn't want to fight. The war was very, very unpopular in Italy. Many did not want to side with the Germans. Many saw that the Italians were opportunists. Many wanted to focus more on being the neutral, staying out of the war, felt it was Germany's fight. Many saw the Germans as their true enemy. And as a result, the war, when Italy entered in 1940, was very unpopular. Now, in this case, why is this book in particular so important for historians? When historians do their work, most times you tend to think that historians tend to focus on historical research and historical scholarship, which historians do. Historians tend to focus on but also they also tend to focus on historical fiction books, because it is a fiction, yes, but it's also one that offers historical perspective. And which is the definition of a historical fiction book, it's a fictional book that occurs in a historical time. So, like, for example, you can make mention of, say, for example, your common everyday Joe ends up getting sent into is ending up fighting in Romania during World War I. Okay, that is considered a historical fiction. Now, many historians get their ideas from children's books because in many ways historians like to be creative, much like any other writer in a book. You want to have creative ideas. You want to focus on, especially if you want to focus on a certain audience, which in Stones and Water, it tends to focus more so on elementary and middle school readers, which when it was written in 1997, there was not a lot of focus paying attention to the German allies, particularly the Italians, Hungarians, Romanians, Bulgarians, particularly the boys, particularly the children of the war. The children suffered dearly during World War II from wherever country, whether it be Italy or Hungary, Romania, Bulgaria, even in Germany. Kids were being forced to go into these work camps in order to help fund the German war effort. And not many times will a story be told from their view. Quite often or not, we often get told the story from the winner's perspective, the winner's point of view. You don't often see a perspective from the losing side of the war. And Italy was seen as both a loser and a winner. Italy, as I said, joined the Nazis in 1940, but would switch sides in 1943. So Italy viewed themselves as a winner, but they were also viewed themselves as a loser because they went to civil war. They went through a civil war which split the country, and as a result, millions and millions of Italians died as a result of the Italian Civil War, and many still blame the Germans for what happened. Hopefully, with covering Stones and Water, will give you the audience a fair concept of what went down, what happened, and hopefully encourage readers and encourage people who are watching my program to go out and to rent or buy Stones and Water. It's truly a great book. When we come back to History Now, we're going to go over the concept of Stones and Water. We're going to go over piece by piece here on History Now, here on ONTV. Hello, Lake Orion and Oakland County. This is Anthony Taormina here, talking a new show here called OA Now. We're going to talk about sports from football to basketball to volleyball to track and field to soccer, cross country, etc. here on OA Now on ONTV. Welcome back to History Now here on ONTV. As I was talking about Stones and Water by Donna Jo Napoli. I want to go over what the book and the concept is all about. It focuses on a young Italian boy whose name is Roberto, who lives in Venice with his family, with his brothers Sergio and Mimo. And also he has a friend named Samuel who is Jewish. Now, for those of you who remember World War II, when I talked about the Holocaust, I ended up talking about how the Germans viewed the Jews with negativity, and how at that point they encouraged their allied countries to go through and to deport their Jews to mostly to Poland and to other areas in whether it be extermination camps or work camps. So in this case, Roberto, the brothers, and Samuel were going to watch an American movie, which at that time in Italy, it was considered illegal to do so because Italy at that time was not in good graces with the United States and vice versa. So it was very, very difficult to go watch an American movie. Now, as the movie was going on, the German soldiers ended up surrounding the movie theater. They took the boys indiscriminately, separated them into groups. Now, it is true that the Germans did separate families during World War II, especially in the later part of the war, as the Germans were going through some struggles of their own. They needed to have, for economic reasons. Italy at that time was allied to Germany, so it was very true that the Germans would go out of their way to separate families. And it wasn't just the Germans, it was also Italians as well, who, particularly fascist sympathizers loyal to Mussolini. In this case, Roberto and Samuel ended up being one group. And Roberto tried to stay as close to Samuel as possible, as Sergio instructed Mimo instructed Mimo to do. He told them to not split up as a group, and he told Roberto and Samuel to stay as a group. Now, Mimo makes a symbolic quote in which the Germans are on their own side. There was a lot of confusion with the Italian boys. There was that the Germans were on our side, and that was quite a symbolic quote, because it is true. The Germans thought of themselves as being on their own side. As I mentioned about during the World War II segment, Hitler always viewed the other countries, his allies, as inferior to Germany. And Italy was no different. So Italy so there was a lot of confusion, lots of shock. Also, the borders were changing, as we'll make mention on a map. As a map I'll show you, Germany ended up occupying multiple countries during the 1940-1941 time period, and it included the areas where our main characters in Stones and Water were going. They were eventually taken to a work camp, not a concentration camp, not an extermination camp. They were taken to a work camp. In the work camps, they were treated somewhat better. They had to work, yes, but they were treated somewhat better. They were, in this case, taken to Ukraine. Once again, like on the trains, they were taken on trains. They were not taken on like cars or anything like that. They were taken on trains. And throughout that process, they were going through separations. Now, Mimo and Roberto and Samuel ended up getting separated themselves. So there was a lot of group mixing. There was a lot of people did not know other people's languages. There was a lot of Italians joined up with other Hungarians and Romanians and not knowing what to do. There was some backlash. There was a little bit of backlash. And as a result, if there was backlash, the Germans ended up shooting you dead. It was almost intended to approach it like a Holocaust-like scenario, just, quote, somewhat better in terms of the treatment. Those who were in the camps were only fed bread, meat, potatoes, were often given water. But they were not treated any differently than say anybody else. The Italian boys in that camp, the only reason why they were treated the way that they were was because they were seen as Italians, not seen as Jews. And many Germans thought that the kids in the camp were Jews, and that wasn't the case at all. Now, as the Germans were forced to fight in the Soviet Union, they abandoned the camp. So they left the boys on their own to fend for themselves. And like what was going on in the camps, in the Holocaust, in the extermination camps in the country, there was often a struggle for survival. Samuel, the young Jewish boy who Roberto tried to protect, would try to commit suicide a few times, try to reveal himself, was not afraid to reveal his Jewish heritage. But there was a constant struggle for survival amongst the boys. And for Roberto and for Samuel, it was no different. and it was include finding German boots. And as a result, in the camps, they were taken to they would cause some jealousy, and also they were taken to the Ukraine, which in the Ukraine during that time it was very cold. So as the Germans were advancing deeper and deeper into the Soviet Union, abandoning the boys in Ukraine, the weather was also very cold. There was lots of snow on the ground. It was just horrible conditions. Up to minus 20, up to minus 40-degree wind chills. Now, this jealousy, the struggle to survival, would cause Samuel to get attacked and was brutally beaten. Roberto tried to defend Samuel, but Samuel would try to defend, and Roberto often was being the instigator. Samuel would defend him. Other way around here, and Samuel would sadly die from the cold. And it caused Roberto now to fight his own struggle of survival. The goal for him was to head back to Italy. Throughout this process, throughout his major goal, he established several smaller goals, which is to get to the Black Sea. He had to encounter Ukrainians who were very hostile to him because they saw the boots. One would kidnap Roberto, change Roberto's entirely to that of a Ukrainian boy. He also had to overcome the fear of the Germans, thinking that the Germans would find him, would arrest him, would possibly execute him, send him to possibly another labor camp or something worse. So Roberto set a pair of small goals. One was to get to the Black Sea, possibly to get to Romania. In doing so, he confronts a Roman, Dr. Mercurio, a deserter. Now, for Italians, it was common to desert the Germans during the war. It wasn't their fight. It wasn't seen as their war. Italian morale was never high to begin with during the war. So it was very common for Italian troops, especially fighting in Russia, to desert the Germans. And in this case, Roberto would later find out that Dr. Mercurio himself was a deserter, but he had his Italian uniform on, so that the Germans had no idea that he was seen as a deserter. Their goal throughout the book, later on in the later parts of the book, was to join the Italian resistance in Venice and to get back to Italy, and they eventually get to do so. But Roberto learns a lot about himself in the book. Roberto is learning how to overcome the cold, learning how to overcome the Germans, and in doing so, they never tell the end of the book, which does he go back and fight in 1943, but his goal is there, and his goal is to get to the Black Sea and to the Mediterranean Sea, and eventually into Allied occupied Italy. Now, when we come back to History Now, I'm going to go over the conclusion, but also I'm going to read Why Am I Doing a Book Review on Stones and Water, here on History Now on ONTV.
Hey kids, this is your old pal the Easter Bunny inviting you to hop on over to the Orient Center on Saturday, March 21st for the 2015 Bunny Bop. Bring a basket to hunt for eggs filled with candy and prizes and create fun craft projects. And of course, I'll be there for special photo opportunities. The family-friendly fun starts at 10 a.m. Pre-registration is required because space is limited. For more information, visit orienttownship.org or call 248-391-0304, extension 305. Hope to see you there.
Welcome back to History Now here on ONTV. I'm your host, Anthony Taormina. As I said to you earlier, I'm covering a book called Stones and Water by Donna Jo Napoli. I was going to talk about a lot of viewers are going to ask, why did I cover this book? Why did I cover Stones and Water? This book here has special meaning to me. I first read the book when I was in middle school at Scripps in 6th grade. And I loved it. It ended up being one of my favorite works. Um, as I said earlier, I do have Sicilian roots. I'm considered, yeah, I'm born an American, but I'm also considered Sicilian. And any book that has Italian feelings towards it, I'm going to have a direct interest in it because it does involve Italy. It does involve World War II, two very strong topics that I have very strong interest in. And in World War II, I really wanted to know further and go deeper into what Italy's role was. Now, Italy was seen as an ally of Germany until 1943, when Italy surrendered to the Allies, and Germany ended up occupying Italy from 1943, and a civil war was fought between Italian partisans, which I mentioned the Italian resistance in Venice that was part of the partisan movement, and also between the Italian fascists. So it was a big interest to me. I really loved reading the book back in middle school, and I quickly grew to become attached to it. Now, during that time, when I was in middle school and then later in high school, I tried looking for the book again. But I was never able to find it in high school. But I never ever stopped being attracted to it or being interested in the book. So I ended up looking, and then I finally found it. Friend of mine actually helped me find the book. And then I later found it again at the Lake Orion Library. And I found out that the book was also at Walden Middle School during that time too. So I chose to read it, and also it's a catalyst to a work that I've been working on for some time. Actually, a couple of works. When I was in high school, when I was in high school, I ended up writing a book which was kind of loose-leafed on Stones and Water, which it was a book that I wrote in tribute to my friends. It was a kind of a short story / book. I haven't got it published yet, but I mean, I'm hopeful to doing it. It focuses on all the areas in Europe, not just Italy, but all the areas in Europe. And this book, Stones and Water, is a catalyst to when I first started working on that work. It kind of sets a standard in terms of what do I want my books, especially now that I've turned my book into a book series. And this was the book that kind of started the ideas for why I wanted to go in terms of writing a book. Another catalyst for me is it's a novel. I also am writing a novel about in this case I focus on a young man, a fiction character. Unlike my series, where that's kind of where I had to get permission from my friends to use their names. And in the novel I'm using a fiction name. And I focus it more so on Hungary, and basically, but a lot of the catalyst is very similar to the Stones and Water book, in which, though it's not as much of a historical fiction, but it is in a sense, because I put my character through Hungary during 1944. But in this case, Stones and Water was written in the time period from 1941, 1942. Where Italy was, fighting in the Russian front, and it was also, during Ukraine as well in 1941 as well. It was very, very tough period for a challenging period. There was also that strength of survival. The other reason why I like the book, outside of the man versus man concept, was also man versus nature. Roberto, the main character, and also Samuel as well, had to overcome not just German brutality, but also they'd overcome the cold and the cold temperatures, and the goal, especially for Roberto, to come home. And he would do anything just to come home. And he was able to accomplish that goal of being able to have a game plan to come home. Now, in the end of the book, they don't mention whether they truly come home or not, or whether the Germans find them, or they truly join the Italian resistance movement. This is kind of unique because I felt that the author, Donna Napoli, wanted readers to come to their own conclusion. Did they come home? Did the Germans shoot them down? Did the Allies arrest them? Those are conclusions that the author wants you to come up with. And but the way that it looks, it's more than likely that they could have gotten to Italy. But, who knows? But that's kind of the conclusion the author wants you to come up with. She wants you to come up with your own conclusion. My take on it was they got to Italy. They both fought in the Italian resistance movement and played a role in helping overcome the German occupation in Italy. And eventually, because the war in Italy lasted until 1945. So it makes you wonder, did they survive the war? Did they not? The author author wants you to come up with your own conclusion. I truly recommend you guys, the viewer, to definitely take a look at this book, to read this book. It is a great read. I truly would recommend you guys, if you're interested in a good historical fiction book, go and read this book. It is truly an amazing book. I would definitely, if you're a middle schooler, high schooler, college, or even an adult, read this book. I'm signing off from History Now. I'm Anthony Taormina. Good night, Lake Orion, and see you soon.